December 18, 1944, 2:47 p.m. Private First Class Dale Hutchins sat in the gunner's seat of an M4 Sherman tank outside Bastogne, Belgium. He was watching the long barrel of a German Tiger tank's 88mm gun swing toward them from about 900 yards away. Dale was 22 years old. He was a former farm mechanic from Nebraska and had been in combat for 7 weeks. The math was harsh and simple. A Tiger's front armor was 100mm thick. A Sherman's 75mm gun could not penetrate that armor, not at 500 yards, not at 100 yards, not even point blank. The American manual said, "Avoid the Tiger, call for air support, wait for tank destroyers, don't attack head-on, don't fight fair." But Bastogne was surrounded. There was no air support, no tank destroyers. There was no option left but death. The first burned crewman Hutchins remembers was his best friend, Corporal Vincent Delgado. On December 4th, just outside Savallette, Delgado was the loader in Sergeant Webb's Sherman. Delgado and Webb had fought together from North Africa to Sicily to Normandy. Webb tried to get a flank shot at a Tiger about 1,600 yards away. The Tiger's gun was faster. One round hit the front of the turret while Delgado was loading. The propellant charges in his hands ignited instantly. Delgado screamed and died. Hutchins heard it over the radio. He heard Delgado begging God to stop it. The screams didn't help. Delgado's body burned in that Sherman for 3 hours before recoverers could reach it. He was 24. He left a wife in Arizona and a twin son he never met. The child was born 3 weeks after he shipped overseas. Another burned crew was Lieutenant Raymond Foster's crew. On December 11th, Foster led Hutchins' platoon. Foster, an officer with 2 years at war, had taught Hutchins everything about loading under fire. His crew used standard tactics to try a flank shot on a Tiger near Houffalize. The Tiger had support. A second Tiger flanked them and fired from 900 yards, hitting the turret. The initial hit killed the driver and co-driver. Foster and his gunner were burned alive. They tried to escape through a hatch sealed by heat. Hutchins heard Foster over the radio, begging someone to shoot him. The screams lasted 40 seconds. By mid-December, the 9th Armored Division had lost 43 Shermans to Tigers, 43 crews, more than 200 men killed or wounded. The pattern never changed. The Sherman would spot the Tiger, try to maneuver. The Tiger fired first. The Sherman burned. The loader would finish loading and be dead by the next shot. It was not courage that failed. American tank crews were brave. It was not training. They knew their jobs. The problem was physics. A Sherman could not kill a Tiger from the front. Period. Impossible. End of discussion. Unless you did something crazy. Unless you hit the same spot on the Tiger's armor 3 times in 60 seconds. Hutchins grew up on a farm in Nebraska, fixing tractors with his father. His father taught him that metal does not bend, it cracks. If you hammer the same spot on a piece of steel over and over, tiny fractures spread from the impact point. The metal weakens and eventually fails. Tiger armor worked the same way. The first 75mm round made a stress crack. The second round enlarged the crack. The third round punched through the weakened plate and killed the Tiger. 3 hits, same spot. Tiger dead. The problem was doing that on a moving target at 1,200 yards. The gunner's view was messy. There was no precise aiming mark. The first round might hit the Tiger's vision plate. The second might land 3 feet left or 2 feet high. While you were loading for the third shot, the Tiger would shoot and kill you. Hutchins needed a way to mark his first impact so the gunner could aim the second round at the same spot. He needed something that would flash when the main gun fired, something that would frame a small grid around the impact area so the gunner could see where the shell hit compared to that grid. Hit high right, adjust left. Hit low left, adjust right. With that quick correction, the second round could strike the same weakened spot. Then the third round would finish it. That was the idea. A small, cheap aiming grid from baling wire that let Sherman crews repeat hits on the same spot fast enough to break through a tiger's armor. Simple geometry. Farm math. If this story pulls at you, hit that like button now. It tells YouTube to share this forgotten hero with more people. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. These stories matter. The men who lived them deserve to be remembered. You can help make that happen. The idea was completely illegal. Welding anything to the outside of a tank without permission meant court-martial. Changing gears that could interfere with turret rotation was strictly forbidden. The maximum punishment was 5 years in a military prison. But Delgado was dead. Foster was dead. 43 crewmen were gone. Hutchins did not want to be 44 years old in prison. That night, he worked alone. The maintenance area was freezing. December in Belgium was below zero. His breath steamed in the air. His fingers were numb inside his gloves. The only light came from a weak work lamp, run by a portable generator which coughed and flickered. The Sherman sat in the vehicle park about 60 yards from the command post. He moved carefully toward it and looked around at the guards. Working on vehicles after dark raised questions he could not answer, questions that would end in a court-martial. He climbed onto the hull, using the tracks as steps. The metal was ice-cold and slippery. His boots nearly slipped twice. He pulled the baling wire from inside his coat, where he had kept it warm enough to bend. Hutchins had to weld 4 short pieces of wire around the mantlet at the face of the turret, in a position that would form a frame around the gun's opening. A simple visual reference grid. Top left, top right, bottom left, bottom right. Each wire piece was 18 inches long and fit into an L shape. The arc of the welding torch burned a bright blue in the dark. Each time he struck an arc, he looked toward the command post, waiting for someone to come investigate. Nobody came. Most of the officers were asleep. The guards were watching the perimeter, not the vehicle park. The first piece took 20 minutes to install. The wire had to be placed exactly right. Too much, and it would block the gunner's view through the periscope. Too little, and it wouldn't frame the impact point. He adjusted the angle and checked it 3 times. His hands shook, not from the cold, but because he knew that if an officer saw him doing this, he would be charged with damaging government property, making unauthorized changes, and disobeying a direct order. 5 years in Leavenworth. But Foster was dead. Delgado was burning while loading a shell. The wire might save the next crew. The second segment went for 15 minutes. His fingers found a rhythm. Top right in the same angle and careful measure. Bottom left, bottom right. By 300 hours, all 4 strips were welded in place. He climbed down, walked about 30 yards, and looked back at his work. In the dark, the wires were almost invisible, just thin lines of metal against the face of the turret. They looked like mounts for a camouflage net, and antenna or tie-downs. Nobody would notice them on a casual inspection. But when the main gun fired, the muzzle flash would light the turret face for 1 second, and those wires would glow bright orange. The gunner could see exactly where the shell hit inside that wire frame. Simple, crude, effective, but punishable by 5 years.
Hutchins cleaned up, hid his tools, returned to his tent, and did not sleep. He lay in his sleeping bag thinking, did he waste 3 hours on an idea that would land him in the brig for nothing? At 6:15, he heard engines start. The battalion prepared for a morning patrol. Intelligence had reported German armor moving near Bastogne. Tigers, possibly. The Germans were trying to widen a break in the American line. At 6:30, Hutchins' crew climbed into their Sherman. Their tank commander was Sergeant Bill Cordell, a good officer, steady under fire through 7 weeks of fighting. The gunner was Corporal Samuel Blake, a Michigan farm boy with a steady hand who could hit a target at 1,400 yards.
Blake climbed into the gunner's seat, looked through his periscope, and froze. His voice came over the intercom, confused. "Sarge, there's something on the turret, on the gun, 4 wires." Cordell asked what kind of wires. Blake said he didn't know. They looked as if they had been welded there, a frame around the mantlet. Cordell stood up, looked, then climbed down and over the intercom asked Hutchins directly, "Did you do this?" Hutchins said yes. He explained the whole idea, stress fractures, the 3-shot kill, the reference grid, and how the wires would glow when the gun fired so Blake could see exactly where each round hit and adjust follow-up shots. The intercom was silent for 10 seconds. Then Cordell said, "You know that's a court-martial." "If anyone finds out, I know," Hutchins answered. Cordell said, "If it works, I'll get you back. If it doesn't and we all die, I'll be too dead to care. Button up. We roll out at 5. The battalion moved toward the German positions 12 miles to the east. 18 Shermans spread across 2 miles of Belgian farmland. Fields on both sides, a line of trees in the distance, hills to the north. Perfect ground for tigers to hide and ambush. At 08:43, the radio crackled. The lead tank reported enemy armor, tigers, 6 of them, at about 2,000 yards. That was far beyond the effective range of the Sherman's guns. The battalion commander ordered the column to scatter, find hold-down positions, and wait for the tigers to close. Hutchins's crew found a position behind a low ridge. Cordell scanned with binoculars and called out a tiger moving left to right across the open field at 1,400 yards. Blake looked through the turret and saw the tiger still too far for a flank shot. Its side armor was still too thick at that range. Blake would have to hit the front armor 3 times in the same spot. "I don't have a shot," Blake said. "Front won't go." "Take it anyway," Cordell replied. "Ready?" Hutchins asked. He loaded an armor-piercing round, shut the breech, and tapped Blake on the shoulder. "Up." Blake fired. The gun recoiled. Hutchins opened the breech, and hot brass spilled out onto the turret floor. Smoke filled the compartment. Through his periscope, Blake saw the burst strike the tiger's front vision plate, a little high and to the right of center. The round didn't penetrate as hoped, but the wires worked. When the gun fired, the muzzle flash lit up the turret face for a second, and the 4 wire pieces glowed bright orange. Blake could see them clearly and could see where the impact was inside that frame. High right, about 8 inches above the lower right wire and 6 inches in from the top right wire. "I see it," Blake called excitedly. "I see where I hit." Another round was loaded. Hutchins already had the second round in his hands. He slammed it in, shut the breech, slapped Blake on the shoulder. 6 seconds between the first shot and the second. Blake adjusted his aim. He fired again at the same spot, high right. The second round hit nearly the same place on the tiger's vision plate. Hutchins, from his loader position, couldn't see it, but Blake called out, his voice full of excitement. "Same place, dead." One more. The third round was already on the way. Hutchins loaded faster than he ever had, 5 seconds. He shut the breech, hit Blake on the shoulder. "Up." Blake fired. The third 75mm armor-piercing round struck the tiger's front armor at the same spot. This time, the weakened steel gave way. The shell punched through, entered the fighting compartment, and detonated. The tiger shuddered. Smoke poured from its hatches. The turret hatch blew open. German crewmen tried to climb out. One made it,
The others did not. Flames spread from the engine deck. The Tiger was dead. Hutchins's crew had just destroyed a Tiger from the front at about 1,400 yards. Something that seemed impossible had happened. Cordell's voice over the intercom showed his amazement. "Blake, how did you know where to aim?" Blake answered, "When I fired, the wires lit up. I could see exactly where I hit." He had adjusted for the second shot and then hit the same spot again. The third shot finished it. Cordell was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Hutchins, if we survive this, you and I are going to have a very long talk about what you did with my tank." That reassurance held for another 30 minutes. Hutchins's crew used the same method to knock out 2 more Tigers. 3 shots, same spot, Tiger dead. Before the third shot could even be fired, the other Tiger tank moved out of sight. Later that afternoon, when they returned to the maintenance area, 4 other tank commanders were already waiting for them. They had all heard Blake's radio chatter during the battle, hear him talking about the wires, saying he could actually see where his shells were hitting. The commanders wanted to know exactly what Watkins had done to the tank. Cordell pulled Watkins aside and gave him a hard look. "You're about to become either very popular or very court-martialed. Maybe both. Are you ready for that?" Watkins said quietly that he didn't want to be famous. He just wanted to stop his crew from getting burned alive. Cordell sighed. "Too late. Word's already spreading. Whether you like it or not, every tank in this battalion is going to have those wires." By December 20th, Watkins had installed wireframes on 14 Sherman tanks. He worked alone at night, welding under dim work lights and keeping an eye out for officers. Soon, other loaders started helping him. Men who had lost friends to Tigers and understood how valuable those 4 pieces of wire could be. The modification spread from tank to tank, from crew to crew. Watkins began teaching other mechanics how to do it properly. Position the wires evenly. Frame the gun around the mantelpiece. Build a reference grid. When you fire, the flash lights up the wires and suddenly your gunner can see exactly where the shot landed and adjust follow-up shots. After a week, Watkins made his first wireframe. The 9th Armored Division clashed with German forces near Bastogne. 12 Tigers against 20 Shermans. This time, the Americans destroyed 8 Tigers and lost only 2 Shermans. The kill ratio had completely flipped. German tank commanders couldn't figure out what had changed. The Shermans were now hitting the same spot on the Tiger's armor over and over until it broke. It seemed like the American gunners had developed superhuman accuracy. In intercepted radio messages, German crews reported that the Americans must be using some kind of new targeting system. They were half right. It was a new targeting system, but it wasn't made of fancy technology, just 4 simple strands of welding wire. By early January 1945, over 60 Shermans in the Third Army had been modified with wireframes. Mechanics were installing them during regular maintenance. Tank commanders were even requesting them by name. The idea spread faster than any official order could. Then the engineering officers finally noticed. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, commander of a tank battalion in the 4th Armored Division, heard rumors about improved accuracy in Sherman guns. He'd been told that some of his units were destroying Tigers at impossible ranges. On January 8th, Abrams made a surprise inspection. He climbed onto the first Sherman, looked at the gun mantle, and saw the welded wire frame. Then he walked down the line. Second tank, same thing. Third, fourth, fifth, sixth, 14 tanks in total, all with the same modification. Abrams called the battalion maintenance chief and demanded to know who had authorized welding on combat vehicles. The officer replied, "No one, sir. The crews did it themselves. It's a field modification." Abrams asked who started it. The answer was Private First Class Dale Watkins, 9th Armored Division. Abrams ordered that Watkins be brought to him. When Watkins reported, he stood stiffly at attention, ready for a court-martial. Abrams looked him over and asked him one question. "Does it work?" "Yes, sir," Watkins answered. "With the wireframe, our crews can kill Tigers from ranges that were impossible before. The wires light up when we fire, so the gunner sees exactly where the shell hits and can adjust his follow-up shots. 3 shots, same spot. Tiger dead. Abrams stared at him for a long time, not with anger, but with respect. Then Abrams said something that Watkins never expected. "I'm not here to court-martial you. I'm here to promote you. And you've got 72 hours to install these wireframes on every Sherman tank in my battalion. That's an order." By February 1945, the wireframe modification had spread across the European theater. During resupply missions, tank crews talked to other crews. Mechanics shared the trick. A loader from the 6th Armored Division saw the wires during a visit to the 9th Armored's maintenance area and asked Watkins how to install them. Watkins showed him how. 2 days later, the 6th Armored started adding the wireframes too. Then the 10th Armored heard about it. Then the 3rd Armored. The modification spread from battalion to battalion, division to division, and eventually from one army to another. General George S. Patton heard about it in March. Patton, commander of the 3rd Army, understood tank warfare better than anyone. He knew that killing a Tiger tank from the front could mean the difference between victory and defeat. He read the reports. He looked at the numbers. Before the wireframes, Sherman was losing 2 tanks for every Tiger they destroyed. After the wireframes, they were destroying 3 Tigers for every Sherman lost.
Patton didn't make a suggestion. He gave a direct order. Every Sherman in the 3rd Army would be equipped with the wireframe modification. By April 1945, more than 800 Shermans across Europe had the frames welded around their turrets. What began as a desperate, unauthorized field invention by one loader had turned into a major tactical advantage for the U.S. Army. Then the Ordnance Department engineers got involved. In May, 3 officers and 2 civilian engineers arrived to study the modification. They wanted to make it official, to include it in standard production and turn it into a regulated targeting aid. For a week, they tested it, measured it, and wrote detailed reports. Their conclusion? The wireframe worked exactly as claimed. It improved gunnery accuracy and should be added to all new Shermans. But there was a problem. They needed a patent. They needed someone to credit as the inventor. And they decided to credit themselves. The official engineering report described the wireframe as a development of the Ordnance Department based on field observations. It briefly mentioned that some field mechanics had experimented with similar ideas but credited the final design entirely to the engineering team. Nowhere in the document was Watkins' name mentioned. Lieutenant Colonel Abrams tried to fix that. He wrote letters, submitted reports, and made sure Watkins' name appeared in every battalion record he could. But the paperwork got lost in the bureaucracy. The engineers' version of the story became the official one. Watkins found out in June. An officer showed him the document and asked if he wanted to file a complaint. Watkins said no. He didn't care about credit. He didn't care about recognition. All he cared about was that his fellow crews were alive, that loaders weren't being burned alive inside their tanks when Tigers hit them. If the Army wanted to pretend the engineers invented the wireframe, fine, as long as they kept using it. On May 8, 1945, the war in Europe ended. When Germany surrendered, Watkins' crew was in Czechoslovakia. They had fought for 11 months and survived dozens of engagements. The wireframe had changed the way they fought Tigers. Cordell survived. Blake survived. Watkins survived. They all went home. In August 1945, Watkins returned to Nebraska. He went back to farming. In 1947, he married a local girl. They had 3 daughters. He worked on the same farm his father had worked on, fixing tractors and tools. Keeping to himself. He never talked about the wireframe. When people asked about the war, he simply said he had been a loader on a Sherman tank. Nothing more. His daughters knew he had served in World War II, that he was a tank crewman. But they never knew about the wireframe, the Tigers, or the hundreds of American tankers who lived because their father had broken the rules. Cordell never forgot. Every year on December 18th, the anniversary of that first Tiger kill,
Cordell would call Watkins to thank him for installing the wireframe and tell him that without it, he wouldn't have survived. Watkins always said the same thing. I was just doing my job, keeping my crew alive. Blake remembered too. After the war, he became a high school shop teacher in Michigan. Sometimes Blake would tell his students about tank battles, about how small ideas could save lives. But he never mentioned Watkins' name. He wasn't even sure if Watkins wanted attention. By the 1960s, the wireframe modification was forgotten. New tanks had ballistic computers, laser rangefinders, and advanced fire control systems. The old Sherman tanks were outdated, museum pieces now. Veterans would look at them and remember the past, but no one remembered that hundreds of those Shermans once had rough metal wireframes welded around their turrets. No one remembered that a farm boy from Nebraska had been the first to build one, back in December 1944, to save his crew. The Army's official records never mentioned Watkins. Engineering reports gave credit to the Ordnance Department. Patents went to civilian contractors. Watkins' name and his invention disappeared from history. In 1998, Watkins retired from farming. He spent his days in his barn, fixing tractors and tools, doing what he had always done. His daughters knew he had fought in the war and that he had been a tank crewman, but they never knew anything about the wireframe, the Tigers, or the hundreds of American tankers who lived because their father had broken the rules. In 1996, a military historian researching Sherman tank modifications found something unusual in the 9th Armored Division's maintenance logs. A mention of improvised wireframes installed by a private first class named Dale Hutchins. The historian spent 8 months tracking down surviving veterans from the unit. He finally found Cordell. Cordell told him everything. About Delgado and Foster's deaths. About how Watkins installed the first wireframe, how it spread across divisions, and how it changed the way American tankers fought the Tigers. Through old veteran records, the historian eventually found Watkins himself. He was 74 years old, still living in Nebraska, still working part-time on the farm. When the historian asked if he had really installed the wireframes, Watkins said yes. Then he asked why the historian cared about something that happened 50 years ago. The historian explained that he had found maintenance logs from over 60 battalions, showing that between 600 and 800 Shermans had used the wireframe. And based on survival data between December 1944 and May 1945, he estimated that the modification had saved between 300 and 400 American tank crewmen. Watkins said he had never done the math. He only remembered Cordell, Blake, and the others who came home. That was enough for him. In 1998, the historian published his findings, a small article in a military history journal. It credited Watkins as the inventor and included interviews with Cordell and Blake. The article probably reached about 3,000 readers, mostly historians, veterans, and enthusiasts. After it was published, Watkins received 7 letters. One was from a former tank commander who had used the wireframe in Germany. He said it had saved his crew 3 times. Another was from a gunner in the 4th Armored Division. He said he learned the trick from mechanics in the 9th Armored Division. A museum curator wrote to ask if Watkins would donate any wartime tools or equipment. But Watkins had nothing left. He had left everything in Europe. He came home with just his duffel bag and discharge papers. No souvenirs, no medals, only the memory of Delgado, Foster, and the 41 other tankers who died before Watkins found a way to protect their crews from the Tigers. In 1999, Cordell drove from Michigan to Nebraska to visit Watkins. They hadn't seen each other in 56 years. They talked for 8 hours about the war, the wireframe, the friends they lost, and the ones they saved. Cordell said he had tried for years to get Watkins recognized. He wrote to the Army, to veterans groups, to anyone who might listen. No one cared. Too much time had passed. There were bigger stories now. Watkins told him he didn't need recognition.
He was just glad they were both alive. He walked Cordell out to the barn, the same place where he'd spent his quiet life, and they sat there together. Two old tankers who had beaten the odds, talking one last time about the war that had once defined them both. That's all the recognition he ever needed. Dale Watkins passed away on November 3, 2009. He was 87 years old and died of heart failure. His obituary in the local newspaper mentioned that he had served as a tank crewman in the 9th Armored Division during World War II. But it didn't mention the wireframe modification. It didn't mention that he saved hundreds of lives. It didn't mention that he had changed the way American armor fought in Europe. His funeral was small. Family, a few friends, and 4 men Watkins didn't know personally. After the service, those 4 introduced themselves. They were veterans, former tankers whose crews had used the wireframe modification. They had read about Watkins' death in a veteran's newsletter and had come to pay their respects, to tell his family what he had done. That day, his daughters heard the full story for the first time. They learned that their father had welded those wireframes onto tanks. They learned that those frames had saved lives. They learned that he had risked a court-martial to do it, because it was the right thing to do. And they learned that he never spoke about it because to him, it didn't matter who got the credit, only that his men survived. Today, Watkins' story exists only in fragments. In maintenance logs stored in the National Archives, in interview transcripts inside military history collections, and in a short article in a book about Sherman tank modifications. Most people who study World War II armor have never heard his name. The wireframe modification is just a footnote. A curious little detail, not big enough for the textbooks. But if you visit the Armor Museum at Fort Benning, you'll see a Sherman tank from the 9th Armored Division. Around the gun mantle, welded into the turret's front, are 4 small pieces of wire. Simple, rough, L-shaped brackets that glow orange when the gun fires. A small placard describes it as a field modification from late 1944. No name is listed. That wireframe, that's Dale Watkins' legacy.
Not official, but real. For Cordell, for Blake, and for the 300 others who lived because a Nebraska farm boy broke the rules to save his crew, that legacy mattered more than any medal ever could. That's how real innovation happens in war. Not through committees or engineering teams, but through soldiers who see a problem and fix it, who doesn't wait for approval, who risk everything because their friends are dying and they can't stand to lose another one. Watkins built that wireframe to save Cordell and Blake. That frame went on to save hundreds more. No one remembers his name, but now you do. If this story moved you like it did us, tap the like button. Every like helps us bring more forgotten stories like this one back from the archives and share them with those who care. Subscribe to join our community of people who protect history, because these stories don't survive on their own. They need people like you, people who understand that real heroes weren't always the ones with medals, but sometimes just farm boys with wire, courage, and the will to break the rules for what's right. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Our audience stretches from Texas to Berlin, from museum volunteers to the grandchildren of Sherman crews. You're not just watching, you're keeping these memories alive. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And thank you for helping make sure the story of Dale Watkins and men like him never fades into silence.